about the teams. One is, what are the law firms doing, and what are the legal departments doing, and what are they doing together in order to create the most inclusive and equitable workplaces that we can in law. So I'll briefly introduce the speakers today, and then Gina has graciously agreed to serve as our moderator. Just to back up quickly, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Inclusion Blueprint, so that started about 3 or 4 years ago. It's a little blurry with COVID on when the actual starting point was. 3 or 4 years ago, we crafted the Inclusion Blueprint in partnership with CHIPS. And I think everyone's probably very familiar with CHIPS, but it was started many years ago by a group of 8 female IP chiefs at companies. And their goal was to think about how to increase inclusivity in IP, and in particular, provide a networking space and a learning space and a knowledge sharing space for women in IP. It's grown to thousands and thousands of members. And they called Diversity Lab and said, we've been trying really hard to think about how to best measure inclusion or diversity. But one of the things we haven't seen in the marketplace is a measurement of inclusion. And so Diversity Lab went behind the scenes and did a ton of research on how folks are measuring inclusion in other industries. We looked at what leads to inclusive environments in law firms and legal departments and other legal organizations. And we crafted the Inclusion Blueprint. So it really is all about looking at what are the policies, the practices, and the systems that lead to greater inclusion and lead to greater equity, which should then lead to greater diversity. And the 3 firms that have joined us today, Winston & Strawn, Orrick, and Reed Smith, have been on our Inclusion Champs list for a while now. So they've joined us to talk a little bit about what they're doing. And then also Bernadine, who's joining us from US Bank. Bernadine is one of the most amazing legal departments we've ever had the opportunity to work with, because their GC, Jim Chaucy, and their entire team at US Bank cares deeply about not only making sure that they're inclusive and equitable in their own environment, but they also look outward at their external vendors, including their law firms, to ensure that there's inclusivity and equity in their teams as well. So let me briefly start with Sylvia James. Sylvia is the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer at Winston & Strawn. Before that, she was in a similar role at Baker Botts for 10 years. And before that, she practiced law. So she has an incredibly unique perspective in looking at this topic. And I count her as one of my friends and colleagues for many, many years, who I love to bounce ideas off with. So thanks, Sylvia, for joining us today. We also have Siobhan Hanley joining us. Siobhan is the Chief Talent Officer at Orrick. Prior to being the Chief Talent Officer, Siobhan spent nearly 20 years as a partner at the firm. And she is someone we work with incredibly closely as one of the Move the Needle firms. I also like to tease Siobhan too, because every time we call Orrick to do some new pilot or new experiment, they say yes. And then they say, what is it? What are we doing? Also want to introduce you to Tyree Jones. Tyree is the practice group leader for labor and employment, the global practice group leader for labor and employment at Reed Smith. He's also the lead for the ESG group, and he's also one of the members of the executive committee at Reed Smith. So Tyree, thank you so much for joining us. You know what fans we are of Reed Smith and John and others at your firm. Also, and I've mentioned you already, Bernadine, but again, just to give people a bit of information about your background, Bernadine Lai is the Director of Outside Counsel Relationships at US Bank. And it was interesting, Gina was remarking as we were prepping for this call that it is such an unusual title, partly because US Bank cares so deeply about working with their outside counsel and making sure that they are in fact inclusive and excellent and value-driven. Bernadine was named in that role. So she started as a corporate lawyer in Australia, in Sydney, actually, for many years. She's practiced both in-house and in private practice. She went for a stint at Faegre Benson to help with innovation and client teams. And now she's come over to US Bank to use all of those skills to benefit US Bank and their outside providers in this role. And then last but not least, everybody already knows Gina, but I love to introduce her. Gina is the editor-in-chief of American Lawyer. She is the face you see on the newsletter every morning. And she also is head of the global brand for ALM. So she has, just like everybody on our screen today, many, many day jobs that turn into night jobs and weekend jobs, I would imagine. Gina, thank you again for serving as the host for these webinars, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. It's truly my pleasure. And I am so excited for this conversation, particularly because when you talk about diverse client teams, it really is kind of the manifestation of all of the rest of the work that we're all doing, right? It's great to make our individual organizations inclusive and diverse and work on ourselves, but it's the opportunities that we give our people, particularly in the legal sphere, to make client relationships and get meaningful work and to work together, and the impact that the client, again, particularly in legal, can have on the success of those efforts is just so critical. So I personally think this is a fabulous topic. And I want to just dive right in. And Bernadine, your title just begs for you to get the first question. So I'm going to you first. Want to talk about, it seems to kind of make sense on its face, but why should a legal department, along with a law firm, be working toward diverse client teams? Why does the legal department care?
Yeah, thanks. I really like that question at two levels. As a practical matter, I found from my own personal experience, I think Karen mentioned earlier that I come to this with the background of three parts, having been a client, having been in a firm, and also having been in a firm from a business development perspective. I personally have found that operating at the client team level has been the most effective way to have change in the composition of those teams. Looking at it from a very specific situation and the specific stakeholders involved has been really the way that I have seen change happen. And really the opportunity to move from a firm in-house into the corporate law department is exactly the answer to the question. I just saw an opportunity to be able to, as a client, have a bigger impact on that front. I think that I could see from the firm point of view that there were specific actions that clients can take, questions that clients can ask. And then beyond that, actual mentoring, sponsorship, championing of both the diverse talent on our outside counsel teams, but also the important firm leaders and client team leaders who have a really big impact on the advancement of the careers of those diverse talent. So that's why I think that it is that relationship and working together that will have the biggest impact.
No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And Siobhan, from the law firm perspective, and you've been a practicing attorney and now into a talent officer role, how do you see the importance of the client and the firm working together in this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty, in some ways, it's sort of the key element to the success of an attorney is the experience they're having with clients, right? And so in order to make sure that our diverse lawyers are succeeding, we have to be focused on what opportunities are they getting with our clients, how are they advancing and developing their skill sets. It's really absolutely critical. And that's what's happening at sort of the client team level. And I think focusing on that as the driver, and then thinking about ways to support, driving those diverse client teams, increasing the number of diverse lawyers on our client teams, helps to really get us focused in a way that I think is really singularly focused on outcomes for the diverse lawyers that are going to lead to success, right? We can have programming, we can have support, but if you're not getting that substantive legal experience, if you're not getting those opportunities to get trained, to get traction with clients and start to develop those relationships that lead to further relationships, it's not going to stick, right? We're not going to have sustainable success for our diverse lawyers. And it's really why, we view that as sort of the essence of where we need to succeed.
Well, Tyree, from the practice leader perspective, how have you seen the focus on client teams from both the firm and the client side really have an impact on diversity?
Well, I've seen it in at least two ways. I mean, the first is the impact it has on diversity is diversity builds on itself. So when you begin with the diverse team and a diverse group, which we have in our labor and employment group, it actually makes the process of ensuring you're fielding diverse client teams from our side of the ledger, if you will, that much easier. And then once you fielded those diverse client teams, then all the things kick in that we've all been familiar with. The studies that reflect that diverse teams yield, much more enhanced substantive results and better outcomes in terms of advice and for clients. And so I think gone are the days where there's any further debate about the import of having diverse client teams. It's more focused on how we ensure we're bringing those to bear on the issues of our clients. And that's what we focus on.
Great, thank you. And Sylvia, from the Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer perspective and beyond, I mean, how do you see this really playing out to have a big impact on diversity in the firm?
When you go last, you have to say ditto to what has been said. So just quickly on two things that law firms and legal departments need to focus on this, because to ensure that diverse lawyers have access to key clients and premium work streams. And to what Tyree was saying, what I liked was a few years ago, Acritas in their diversity report actually put some facts behind this, right? That diverse teams really do. We knew that in general, but we didn't have the data for legal, and they provided it, right? So they found that 25% of legal teams, only 25% of legal teams are very diverse. And yet the benefits of diverse teams are clear, that they earn 25% a higher share of wallet, are more than 1.5 times as likely to receive a perfect 10 performance score, and they receive over 3 times higher net promoter scores, which is a client satisfaction index. So there is both that it just makes sense, and that we actually have the facts to show the importance of it. And it's too bad that even with all of that information, only 25% of client teams are very diverse.
Well, I love that you threw out those numbers. Thank you. That is so interesting. And as with many things in the law and elsewhere in life, a lot of things make sense, but in practice, they don't always work out as we expect. So Tyree, I want to kind of come to you with, okay, we know that diverse teams are good. We want them. We talk about it. How do you ensure in practice that it happens, and maybe at a greater rate than 25%? How are you getting the teams put together, and how are you tracking whether that's happening across matters?
Sure. Well, in putting together the teams, I mean, you always start with, what's the substance that's needed, and who are the best team members that you think can deliver on that. And that factors in, whether there's a geographic focus as well, et cetera, et cetera. But it's why I started with the importance of having a diverse group to pick from in the first place, because then as you're, fielding who should be on the team to go out on that pitch, you've increased your chances of putting together a diverse pitch team because your group is diverse. And I'll keep emphasizing that because it's a luxury that we have in the L&E group here that a lot of firms and a lot of other groups don't have for a variety of different reasons. And so it's a call to be very intentional about the importance of still recruiting diverse talent at all levels of your firm. But then when you're picking that pitch team, it always starts with who are the best folks to put out there. You know who they are. And almost everyone on your team no one on your team is going to be an underperformer. So you then are really just focused on what are the needs of the client? How do we best meet that? And does the team we're sending out there meet that as well, particularly from a DE&I perspective? And that just involves knowing your team, who they are, and you'll know whether it's, you've got women on the team, you've got racial and ethnic minorities, members of the LGBTQ plus community. You know who your team members are and whether or not you fielded a team member. And then what you also do is you track the performance of those teams. Did they get the pitch? And were they engaged? And if so, who were the real leads on the pitch? Because all of that's going to factor into then how you allocate credit, origination credit or otherwise for that, which is a critical component of continuing to advance diverse lawyers as well through the ranks.
No, thank you. That's such good points. And Sylvia, would love to see how that's working in practice at Winston too, in terms of how the teams are put together and tracked across the board.
So we do a number of things to ensure that our client teams are inclusive and diverse. I'm just going to mention a few of them. One, we measure the utilization of diverse lawyers on key client teams on a quarterly basis. So we run those numbers all the time. Second, and this has been a huge change to firm culture, but we implemented a formal work assignment system for junior lawyers, right? The free market system, there's enough analysis to show that, you know, it tends to disfavor certain groups. And so for the more junior baby lawyers, we do have a formal assignment system. We also, along with that, have created a prompt that when you're opening up a new matter, you get this prompt that, in order to staff this matter, you need to go through the assignment system. We've always had, even with a free market system, we've always had assignment partners, like I'm sure most law firms do. But we've now going to the additional step of hiring a senior staff person to oversee staffing to help with that. And we still have assignment partners. So that is extremely helpful. Just a couple more things. We had a racial equity task force in 2020, and one of the recommendations was to sit down with the top brain makers to go over the utilization of diverse lawyers on their teams and then their matters. And that's something that we're doing, so that, because sometimes it really helps when people see the data, because they're coming in with right intent. And so when they see the data, they're able to make adjustments. As part of our strategy this year, our diversity and inclusion strategic plan, we're going to recognize and measure and reward inclusive staffing when it comes to compensation time. And we've started, and this was something that Karen, Stacy, and Diversity Lab through Mansfield really helped us to get to this point. We were tracking, you know, who went on pitches and, you know, who worked the matters when they came on a spreadsheet, right, on an Excel. And now we have Foundation, which is this database where it's incredible. We can track and measure all of this stuff, and we no longer have to use our little spreadsheet that someone had to update. And so we have the data, and it's great to have it, because now that we have it and we analyze it, we make adjustments and changes based on it. So we're doing a lot of different fronts to make sure that our teams are inclusive and diverse.
That's amazing. Thank you for those very practical things that you're doing. I love that. That's something that anybody can look at and implement. I had one follow-up question about the formal work assignment system. I think that's a really great idea, and it's definitely something I'm hearing more firms look at. You mentioned that it's for the younger lawyers. Is there kind of a cutoff of when you can, folks can move away from that system and it is assigned more free market? Is it up to a certain year?
Yeah, for now, it's only in their first 3 years, but I think we're considering expanding it. But it's such a culture shift when you're 100 and something year old firm and you've always had this free market system. It really is a shift, but people are starting to embrace it. And so we're seeing that more assignments are coming through that process now.
Thank you. I appreciate you kind of going off script with me, because I think you're right. I mean, it is a culture shift for so many of these things. When you're talking about changing core processes of the firm, work allocation, origination credit, things like that. I mean, and it takes these concerted but baby steps sometimes, but continued effort. And so Siobhan, I'd love to come to you to talk about how ORIC is handling this and measuring its success.
Yeah, and I kudos to Sylvia for, those are some really great things that they're doing. So we are very focused on data and analytics at ORIC and have been for a while. We do believe that you have to really be disciplined about measuring in order to make progress. We've always been sort of focused on inclusive and diverse teams, of course, as you know, as we've all talked about that imperative. But we are one of the Move the Needle founding firms working with Diversity Lab, the initiative called Move the Needle, where we have agreed to work on a very external facing goal of increasing our diversity with Diversity Lab and with other firms and in-house legal departments. And working with Karen and others that Move the Needle, we've taken a more granular and systematic approach to monitoring our teams and partnering with clients. We've actually built a dashboard. Karen, I think that's your cue to share. Perfect. And just to be clear, this is the dashboard is the real dashboard. This is a, all fake data in here. So what we do here is we are actually using this dashboard to monitor or show the diversity of our client teams compared to the diversity of our firm, to ensure that the client teams are inclusive at all levels. So we're talking about disaggregating by, as you can see, gender, race, LGBTQ+, and then at all levels throughout, right? So we're looking at from the most junior associates up to and including counsel. We have then summary charts that sort of break down the client team by race. We then move into the next page where we've got billable hours, and it compare and head count, and compares the client team with the practice group, so we can figure out where are there potentially some opportunities for the types of work that we're doing for this client. Can we expand? Can we add members of our diverse groups to the team? And we also take that through the leadership. So who are the relationship partners? And we're looking at the partners by, again, gender, race, and LGBTQ. And then scrolling down a little bit more, you'll see, or is that the bottom, Karen? Yeah, and we've also got these are the engagement credit baked in here. And I thought there was a summary at the bottom around engagement credit, but I was wrong about that. It's baked into those summary charts. So we're really getting super granular around what does our client team look like through a variety of different lenses. And importantly, by layering that over where we have diversity in the firm, we can think about how we might do what we talked about when we answered that first question, right? Which is, how do we get our diverse lawyers into these client relationships in a way that's meaningful and a way that's going to lead to their success? And we can sort of match up those opportunities. So we know we're doing some employment work for client X. We've got some diversity there, but wow, look at the diversity of the employment group. How can we leverage some of those diverse lawyers and get them moved into this relationship? So it becomes not just for us, not just a report card, if you will, on how we're doing, but importantly, it's a roadmap, or provides an ability for us to see the opportunities of where we might increase diversity. And that, for me, and for ORIC, I think was a continued challenge, right? Diversify the teams, but where? And not every team. And honestly, look, our numbers are not where they should be across the board. We know in particular, we are not where we should be by any stretch with our Black and Latinx attorneys. But let's think about where we do have that diversity and make sure we are really focused on the opportunities for those lawyers. If, obviously we're thinking about all different groups, but if in particular, if we want to focus on a specific area of dire need of concentration, which includes our Black and Latinx attorneys, we can do so. And we can see where we have the resources and where we don't, where we need to build, where we're having success, where we're not, leveraging that. So it becomes a kind of a living, breathing document and roadmap, and something that's been really a game changer for us.
This is amazing. And Karen, I want you to jump in here. There's a couple questions around this, though, that are both coming from the audience and popped into my head, and I guess you kind of touched on it, which is around how do you measure success with this? Okay, here are the numbers, but is there X percentage of our team that we want to be diverse? And then, there's a question from the group of, well, how do you want diverse teams and of at least X percent, but the profession is made up of this percentage? How do you, there's all these questions about what does success look like, I guess, on this front. So I don't know if
Karen, you want to jump in on that one, or you want me to, or how do you want to do that? I'm happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Siobhan, and then I would love to hear your opinion on this. I think in a diversity lab, we've been looking at it 3 ways. We look at it, how does the legal profession and our teams compare to society as a whole? Now, the problem with that is that the society as a whole doesn't reflect law school. And so, what we have in front of us are those that go to law school and graduate from law school. So I find that to be right now, in the short term, the best measure. And then there's a question of who comes to our firms and our legal departments. And so, one of the reasons that I think Siobhan and Ulrich made a really good decision in comparing the diversity of their teams to the diversity of their firm. And even though they can increase the diversity of their teams and their firm, it's a good starting point to see how inclusive your teams are compared to the representation of your firm. And then how does that compare with the legal profession as a whole? How does it compare with law school graduates? And then ultimately what we hope to get is a reflection of society. So I guess it depends on how bold you want to be, but those are at least 4 different ways to slice and dice progress. One thing I also wanted to add on to what Siobhan said, one of the most important pieces of this, and Tyree, you said this too, is that this has to get to the practice group and the client level. And so practice group leaders like Tyree, at Reed Smith are clearly intimately involved in this. The relationship partners have to be involved. And so one of the great things about the data that Sylvia and Siobhan collect and analyze is that the relationship partners see it and they can interact with it. And so it becomes real to them. And then I know in Siobhan's case, they typically do share this information with their clients. And that was a question that we saw in the chat function. So it's a 2-way dialogue between, the Bernadines of the world who are in those outside counsel roles and their clients. Sylvia, there was one other thing I wanted to say about something you said, and this answers a question from the chat. Somebody had asked, how do we reconcile the fact that, diversity is not where we want it to be? So what do you do? And talking about work allocation, Sylvia, there's a great book called Breaking Through, the Making of Minority Executives in Corporate America. It was written by David Thomas. He's now the president of Morehouse. But what was interesting about this and what we've correlated in the legal field is that the thing that would help our diverse lawyers the most, or all lawyers, is the first assignment and the first human they work with. Because that research shows that makes or breaks what happens years down the road. And as long as they get a chance to course correct, because everybody's going to mess up your first assignment or your first 2 or 3 assignments. So that first assignment, that first person are most important, and the opportunity to course correct are incredibly important. So I love, Sylvia, that you're also focusing on, and I know Siobhan is doing so, and I know Reed Smith is doing so, on the work allocation piece of this puzzle too. So I just wanted to add those things. And Siobhan, if you had anything else to add.
Nope, I think you hit all the high points. I mean, I do think that, look, we have a very public facing goal with Move the Needle, which is to have the diversity of a number of our key client teams be at least 55%. And again, some people say, well, 55% of the in-house legal departments at Move the Needle certainly, pushed on, is that enough? And the answer is, it's not where we want to be, but it does reflect the diversity of the firm at this point. So what we want to do is have all of our legal teams, or our key legal teams that we're focusing on, I think we're up to 35, reflect that diversity as a starting point, and then be increasing our diversity overall. And so that's really what's informing the way we are positioning these dashboards. So I would say that we haven't done these dashboards yet for every client. I think that is our goal eventually, but what we're doing is we're picking really starting with our significant client relationships, because that's where we see the opportunities. Frankly, we're in relationships with those clients, and we're having dialogue with many of those clients about what we're doing, what the goal is, and there's opportunity there. We would welcome that dialogue with any and all of our clients, but as you can see, the dashboard is a large undertaking, and then there's a lot of monitoring, et cetera. So we don't do it yet for every client, but what we're working toward is just making this an ingrained part of our culture and getting to that point. as we sort of continue on this journey, really.
No, it's amazing. I think you're going to get a lot of requests, Siobhan, after this for teach me how to do this. And I want to do this in my firm, so get ready. Bernadine, we are not going to let you stay silent for much longer. I'm coming to you soon, but just one other thing before we go more into the law department perspective. And I want to talk to the law firm folks about origination credit, relationship partner credit, because we know that that's so essential. How are you ensuring diversity in you create the diverse teams, but who's getting the credit and where that really matters? So Tyree, let's maybe start with you.
Sure. It's a great question because I think it focuses on a central metric to advancement, certainly within the firm, originations. I think it starts with, whatever your firm culture is around that. We've developed one that really incents our lawyers to pitch in packs, if you will. We have, various levels of responsibility allocation, whether it's matter responsibility attorney, whether it's matter originating attorney or client relationship attorney. Each different level is a category that assigns contribution by that team member. And then those numbers are tracked in those categories. And so that you have that data available when it comes time for promotions and for comp. And so how that structure gets implemented is driven largely by the relationship partners, those who are putting the teams together, those who are making the allocation decisions. But where our allocation decisions or what they're driven by is, quite frankly, fair allocation. And oftentimes that's easier said than done, to be candid. But I think most of the views, and certainly I know I am of the view, that if two others go out on a pitch with me, and and we all contribute to that pitch and we get the work, then I'll divvy up that origination credit among the three of us equally. And I'll especially do that if I happen to also be the relationship partner. In fact, if I'm the relationship partner where some of those numbers flow into my column anyway, I may even allocate a little greater portion of origination credit to that attorney, depending on their level of seniority, if they're a senior associate or a counsel in particular, or a non-equity partner. Where matter responsibility comes into play a lot is at the kind of mid to senior associate rank levels, where you're really trying to measure the responsibility that those level of attorneys have on the matter, while assigning numerical credit for that, but also seeing and using that data to inform how you evaluate them as they proceed along the upward trajectory, hopefully, toward advancement in the firm. And if and when there are any allocation disputes, those come to the practice group leader. And if not resolved at that level, then they may end up going to the department head, who's either the head of litigation or the head of business and finance. And if not resolved at that level, it could potentially go up to the chairman. But I think the important piece is there's a structure that's built around how you allocate credit, what types of credit you're allocating, and that you've got a process not only to track it and collect the data, because that gets measured as much as utilization does, but then also a process for resolving any disagreements that come up. And sometimes they do, and sometimes you end up learning the disagreement may be a part of not understanding why did that person get 5%? First of all, it's only 5%. What does that matter? Well, that person has had the longest standing relationship with someone who was also integral to us getting engaged. And it's part of acknowledging that there's still a role they play, however small you may think of it. And more often than not, knock on wood, sometimes providing that information is enough for someone to say, okay, got it, didn't understand that, I'm good.
Well, I think aside from giving really great practical tips, Tyree has proven himself a man of character in terms of how he allocates. That is, I hope that a lot of people are like you. I don't know. I've heard varying stories in firms, but that's amazing.
Well, and I do it too, because you want to incent people to keep working with you to as I say, chase business. We all have limited pockets of time, and people can always say, well, I don't know if I want to, take up the time to prepare the pitch and do X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, look, here's how I do it. Here's how I roll. And if we get the work, you'll get credit. Here's where you'll be. And I think the more and more that you have other partners doing that, because I know I'm not the only one in our shop who proceeds that way, because I kind of developed that approach because others brought me along that way as well. And that helped me advance to the equity ranks. But it's just making sure people understand the importance of doing it, the incentivization, the motivation that it has as well.
There's a number of questions in chat for Bernadine on this topic, but before we go there, Siobhan and Sylvia would love your thoughts on origination credits. Siobhan, if you want to jump in.
Yeah, I would just say that, it may touch a little bit on some of the questions that are feverishly coming in, which I love. I think it's really important to understand how origination credit plays into, I can't stand origination credit, right? The whole concept, the whole way it's kind of like the billable hour. Like if I could just figure out a way to just get away from all of that. But I do think it's really important to think about this from a nuanced approach. And I'm sure, all the legal departments that are on, all the firms that are on this call would tell you that originations is not the sole measure of contribution by any stretch. And there are a whole bunch of reasons that drive origination credit. And of course, I 100% would agree with Tyree around incentivizing the right way, et cetera. But I also think there's a more nuance, and look, we're tracking that. We're also tracking something called engagement credit, which is something that we have at ORIC that is, you may be the person that is running the day-to-day relationship or have an important role. You may not have been the original person who even brought in the business if it's a longstanding client, but that you're playing a key role in the relationship as opposed to having originated it. So that's another way we get at it, but it's not perfect. We do really try to get behind the numbers in looking at decisions around compensation, right? And so I think the question really can be more, how are the diverse attorneys in your firm doing as far as advancing in compensation and succeeding, without just saying, are they the partner on this matter getting the origination credit? It's almost too, because I think that, and again, this is getting into the questions, it all depends on how the firm is using it, why they're using it the way they're using it. Are they trying to even move away from that as an indicator of contribution? And can we be more thoughtful together about, okay, you're asking about origination credit, but what are you really trying to get at? Is diverse attorney Y being recognized for his or her contribution in a way that's appropriate and in a way that is ensuring their success, right? And it may be that it's not appropriate at this moment for origination credit, but it is appropriate that they are being recognized for the other role that they're playing. Clearly, with the examples that Tyree is giving, and he's of course incredibly generous and approaching it in a way that would really incentivize, which is if a diverse partner is part of the team winning a pitch, of course there should be origination credit there. But there's a lot more nuance that goes into, I think, beyond that, opening the matter type of event to looking at the overall longer term relationship. And that's why for us, I think clients who really want to engage in a dialogue with us about how they will help us create the opportunity, as opposed to, you have to have a team that's X% diverse. Okay, well, can you help us get there, right? We all know what we're facing in this environment. We all know the hiring challenges we're facing. Anyway, I won't keep going, but
well, Bernadine, you have your hand raised, and Sylvia, we will come back to you, I promise. But yes, we'd love to hear, Bernadine, your thoughts on this.
Yeah, no, I was doing that symbolically as well, because Siobhan was inviting clients to please partner, and that is 100%. that is exactly, I think I shared earlier that the first thing I did on joining US Bank was to change my title from outside counsel management, which is the historical traditional way that this role is run, to outside counsel relationships. And I cannot emphasize more how central that concept of relationships is to all of the work we're doing in the diversity field. To this specific point, I will share that in my short time in-house, every firm I have spoken to, and I've spoken to quite a few of them, measures this very differently. So I will just put that out there. And I 100% agree with you, Siobhan. The first question that we as a client should be asking is, so what are you doing to support the advancement of the diverse lawyers who are on your client teams? How does your firm measure success? What is the next step for each of these diverse talents that you're putting onto your teams? And what can we do to help to advance that? And I think origination credit, or I can't remember the term that you use, Siobhan, but I will promise you, I've had so many conversations, and every firm is worried about how we're going to be measuring because they do it differently. But I 100% recognize that. I've even had a really great conversation last week with a very senior, significant, firm client relationship person who was concerned about this because they don't have origination credit even, for example. So and so my response to him was, thank you for raising that. That's fantastic. Can you tell us what do you do to measure? How do you advance people in your firm then? And then let's talk about specific talent that you have and talk about specific actions that the people on our corporate law department can do to actually help with that and partner with you on that. But I need both. I need to know what we can do, but I also need them to tell me what they're going to do on their side to do that.
Sylvia, any thoughts that you want to throw in here? And then I want to kick it back to Bernadine on a related issue, but anything on the origination credit?
Just one, although I'm looking forward to talking about Coca-Cola's announcement, which was sent to me no less than 12 by 12 different people to talk about what the implications of that is. And I think we have a question that we'll get to that. Just one thing I wanted to add was how succession planning that includes diversity could really help here. One of the things that we know is that diverse folks are generally not in the path of inheritance, and succession planning could really help with that. And I love when I see a question, and we don't see it that much on client surveys, where they're asking a question about succession planning and how does diversity fit into that. But we have so many more things to talk about, so I'll just leave it at that.
No, this is great, and you raised a question that's from the audience, and I think it's relevant to just the broader question, Bernadine, I was going to come to you with, which is, what is the role of the legal department in this space in terms of ensuring that outside counsel are bringing diverse teams? And we saw news yesterday that one major company has walked back from some of those efforts, and in part because of shareholder threats, and so you have these stakeholders, you have you're working with an outside business, the law firm, who operates in their own way. Where does the law department fit in? What should you be asking, requiring, checking in on, all that good stuff?
Yeah, thanks for that question. Actually, I wanted to follow up on what Sylvia was saying, because I 100% agree with you. You had a pithy comment about, getting the data, sharing the data, seeing the data effects change in and of itself. And that's definitely been my personal experience. So number one, we participate in the Dividends Collective with Diversity Lab and with Mansfield. So I got to put that plug in there for you guys. But that's one thing that we do. But actually beyond that, what we have found, we've just gone out to a significant number of our firms, a large number of our firms, and asked for data at a matter level to really try to understand even more deeply and at a more detailed level what's going on in our client teams. So I can share that from the client's perspective, sometimes there's diverse talent laboring away behind the scenes, and the client doesn't actually get to see that work. It doesn't get to see the talent on a daily basis. And so that was a real desire that was expressed when I joined US Bank's corporate law department, that they really wanted to understand better the diversity of their teams. All of the data that Auric and Winston & Strawn is undertaking, and everything that you shared is fantastic. I will say that until we went out and asked for this information, I don't think that any of the firms that do work with us had volunteered it or shared it or come to us proactively. So that's a great example of this partnership opportunity, and where we could really do more if we work together more closely and collaborate better on that front. So absolutely, the data, us going out and requesting the data, the responses from the firms has been very, very positive in providing that information. And we all know that data and reporting, even in and of itself, even though it does achieve something, we want to do more. And so going deeper and responding and following up to actually lean into what the data is showing us, just as Sylvia and Siobhan shared, absolutely we'll be doing that. Again, going back to what I said earlier, it is working together. There's just both sides of the equation, I think, is really what's going to make a bigger impact. But you need both sides. We can't just have the client needs to ask this question, the client needs to push this information, the client needs to do this by themselves. That's why I keep coming back and saying, well, what is the firm doing, ranging from sponsorship at the firm leadership level, at the client team leadership level, but even in the resources from HR, from professional development, from business development, what are you providing as resources to your diverse talent to succeed and advance on our client teams?
And just to stick with that, so you're looking at the data, is there kind of similar to my question to Siobhan, is there a success point where you think, all right, we need you to be at X, and are there consequences for those outside firms if they're not there, or do you work with them in any way to help them get there?
Well, we're looking at the progress. That's what we're focusing on. And I will just share, I just joined a minute ago, joined in November. We just put out that data. I'm waiting for my data analytics team to build me the special machine that's going to give me all the analysis really quickly. In the meantime, I'm diving in to specific information. If I could do a quick plot spoiler, but I know one of the questions is sort of, what is the one thing that I would ask? And it relates to that question because, for example, if I go to a large number of firms and US Bank is on the record for being highly committed to diversity. We are out there publicly saying, as an enterprise, not just as a law department, but as an enterprise, that one of our goals is to close the racial wealth gap, starting with Black. There's a lot of information about what's important to US Bank, and then I put that into my questions pretty specifically. I'm obviously a diverse person. I tell them that I'm a lawyer. I mean, you would think that I'm inviting people to tell me about your diverse teams. Let's just say that it would be great if firms would make it easier for me, I'm interested in diversity, to know when you're proposing a diverse talent and why you're proposing that specific diverse talent and what you're doing to raise that diverse talent up. Does that make sense? That would be a great way to help me to invest in your client teams.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And it brings us, I think, to the flip side of that question is for the law firm folks on this call, what advice would you give to law departments about how they can help you be better? What information do they need to be asking you or pressing you on so that you can go back to help kind of push for that change that Sylvia and others are talking about is difficult? So what do you wish the client would do? So Sylvia, maybe we'll start with you, if you don't mind.
So one thing is rally around a survey. Instead of recreating the wheel, we are drowning in surveys. And we love the fact that clients are requesting that information, and we want to provide every bit of information that they want. But it is sucking up the time that would help us to make more progress. So we have professionals like me and my colleagues who we're focused on, trying to enhance DEI, but our time is being sucked into diversity surveys. So there are good ones out there. I mean, Diversity Lab has diversity dividends, whether it's the ABA, pick one, just pick a couple, and everyone, let's just go to a few of those, and you don't have to create your own, because they've been so thoughtful in terms of the questions that they're asking. And so look at it and let's rally around that. And another last thing on, stealing ideas from Diversity Lab is when you get that survey results, it sure would be nice to hear from you about it. Like, how do we do? It's great to receive these letters that the companies are committed. Here is this survey that it just took me half of a week to complete. And then we don't hear again until next year. The same letter with the same survey. Would like to get some feedback. And in that feedback, we are specifically answering the question, how can we partner together to enhance our mutual diversity goals? And we take time thinking about that, because we're like, they're going to read this, they're going to come back to us, and we're all like huddling. How do we want to partner with this client? And we're like, here are the 6 ways we can do it. Just pick one, we're ready, let's do it. Nothing. So let's partner together. There are all these great ideas of how we can do it, and let's rally around a couple of these surveys and free up the work so we can make that meaningful change that we all want.
Can I say amen to that? Because you have 100 new friends I've never seen so many people furiously writing in like yes to this. So I think there's a lot of agreement with what Sylvia said. Thank you. I don't know who wants to follow that, but
well, I mean, it's really hard to follow that, but Sylvia, and I think it goes to the Coca-Cola walk back, right? Which is decreeing diversity requirements that are unrealistic given the state of play of the legal industry, which is frankly on all of us, right? It's not just the law firm's obligation to increase diversity in the profession. And so the idea that you can't hire X or Y firm because they don't meet these requirements, that's not helping anybody, right? As opposed to, look, we've got diversity dividends or the ABA or whatever survey. We know, we've looked at Orrick's profile, we've looked at Reed Smith's profile, we've looked at Winston's profile, we know X, Y, and Z. Let's drill down a little bit on this, that, or the other, and then let's figure out together how we're going to diversify the team. Is there, I mean, I love, I think it was Bernadine who talked about talent at the lower levels, diverse talent that she was unaware of, right? Uncovering that kind of, how can I help with that? We've had that, again, plugging Move the Needle a little bit here, but having in-house legal departments say, I would be willing to help sponsor and create opportunities for lawyer X or Y, right? That kind of individualized outreach sponsorship, we know that's the meaningful way, right? There's no way to sort of wave a magic wand, or otherwise we all would have done it. And I would say, Orrick and I know a number of other firms were doing 1L fellowships for first-year law students, where we're partnering with in-house legal departments and the students are spending some time with us and some time with the clients. Those are incredibly popular, right? For a law student to say, wow, I get to spend 6 weeks at Winston & Strawn and 4 weeks at Intel or wherever it is. Great, I want to do that, right? And then thinking about pipeline programs, right? The main issue is we still do not have enough diverse law students, right? We do not have enough diverse interest in the law, or if we do, the barriers to getting into because of the testing, the way schools are, think about ways we can creatively partner on those kinds of systemic issues, as opposed to what does your team on my matter look like and how are you going to make it more diverse? Those kinds of questions are not going to advance. They're not going to make the kind of change that we're really all hoping to by participating in forums like this and working so closely with Diversity Lab.
Yeah, I guess I'd add there. I mean, I've only seen the headline, Coca-Cola walks back plan. We'll see how this plays out. I don't expect that Coca-Cola is going to be any less committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion than it has been. So the headline is a great gotcha, but how it ultimately plays out will remain to be seen. And there is a bit of a role to be played for, I think, a carrot and a stick approach. Because while it's important to have this data collected and the time that the surveys take up, it's not only you respond to these surveys and don't hear back. Sometimes if you do hear back, then the real question is, okay, so we did great. What does that mean? I mean, I was in a meeting 10 years ago where a client, called us in for the meeting to go over our diversity scorecard, and we were handling a portfolio of matters. And the general counsel said, because you've delivered on not only what you promised, but you helped us deliver on what we set as a goal for our diversity objectives, we're increasing your portfolio. We're increasing the number of matters that will come to your firm and that you can continue to have these diverse, talented attorneys working on. That's the only time I've ever had that conversation in my career, 10 years ago, when I headed up our diversity program. So figuring out, when we talk about partnering, figuring out how we marry up those kinds of opportunities with actual work opportunities, I think is what ultimately moves the needle in so many different ways. It not only allows diverse attorneys coming up in the ranks to get the experience of interacting with the clients, of building relationships with the clients that could lead to more work, it also helps build up those more senior attorneys who may be in the succession pipeline and begin that dialogue with the client. If the senior relationship partner starts talking with that client about, I'm thinking about stepping away from the practice in a year or two. I want to give you a heads up. And I want to make sure, if you haven't already paid attention to the people I've had in front of you, that you really focus on these two individuals right here, who presumably and hopefully at least one of whom, if not both, are diverse in some regard, and begin that succession process right then in the partnership of having that conversation, so that you don't end up in a situation where senior partner says, I'm retiring next month. And then there's this scramble of, well, who's going to be the new relationship partner? And there hasn't been any thoughtful or any intentionality in it. And sometimes when there is a stick in the sense of, look, just like we rewarded you when you did well, you haven't done really well here, and you haven't presented us with diverse teams. And, that's going to make it a little more difficult for us to keep engaging you. Just that little sentence, I guarantee you, if I'm in that meeting, that goes right back to my chairman. Here's what we need to address immediately. And so it has an effect, and that's part of how the partnership may work as well.
There were so many amazing points in there, Tyree. Thank you. I have to say, this hour went by incredibly fast. Thank you for the passion and the interest from the audience members. At the chat function was just amazing me. So just a couple of quick closing remarks. First, on Coca-Cola. As Tyree said, I don't think them backtracking is any indication they don't care about diversity, equity, inclusion. I think the backtracking is on the method that they took, the how, and not the why, and not, they're caring about it. And also, here's what I would suggest. Let's not focus on that one that backtracked. Let's focus on the hundreds who are doing this and care about it deeply. And then let's look at the bright spots. And to that point, we have 4 very bright spots on our call today with Bernadine, thank you, from US Bank, Tyree from Reed Smith, Sylvia from Winston & Strawn, and Siobhan from Oric. And then, of course, as always, to our masterful facilitator, Gina, you rock. Thank you all for today. And thanks to everyone who joined us. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you again. And thanks to the Diversity Lab team as well. Bye, everyone.